rushing under my wheels. Looking back on the years gone by like so many summer fields. 65, I was 17, running up 101. I don't know where I'm running now, I'm just running on.
Running on.
Running on empty.
Running on.
Running blind.
Running on.
Running into the sun, but I'm running behind. Gotta do what you can just to keep your love alive. Try not to confuse it with what you do to survive. 69, I was 21, I called the road my own. I don't know when that road turned into the road I'm on.
Running on.
Running on empty.
Running on.
Running blind.
Running on.
Running into the sun, but I'm running behind. Everyone I know, everywhere I go, people need some reason to believe. If it takes some time, that will be alright. If I can get you to smile before I leave. Looking out on the road, rushing under my wheel. I don't know how to tell you just how crazy this life feels. Look around for the friends that I used to turn to pull me through. Looking into their eyes, I can see them running too. Running on empty.
Running on.
Running blind.
Running on.
Running into the sun, but I'm running behind.
Running on.
Running on empty.
Running on.
Running blind.
Running on.
Running into the sun, but I'm running behind. I'm running behind. I'm running behind.
That song was first released in 1977. And what's so interesting is that it was on the top 100 Billboard at number 11 for 17 weeks. And I think the reason is because it so resonated with people back then, and I believe that it resonates with us today as well. I think about this season that we are entering into from Thanksgiving all the way to New Year's, kind of this 6-week time frame, just jam-packed with all sorts of things. It's packed with all these joyful, happy, good things, and with the holidays, and we've got gifts that we're giving, and we're celebrating, and there's all these new cheesy Christmas movies coming out, if you like those. I don't know if that's you or not. But it's got all of these things, and then not only this, but it's also packed with family dynamics and 17,000 Christmas parties that we're supposed to go to. It's packed with end of year for business and finance. And did I mention family dynamics? Just want to throw that one out there. Again, all of these things converge. And because of that, we might find ourselves thinking or experiencing at some point this idea or this thought that we are running on empty. Maybe you find yourself there today, and wherever you are, what we wanted to do today is pause before we get into our Christmas series next week, which we are so excited for. Just wanted to pause and provide an opportunity to be refreshed on something that's really important in our life, to remember something that's important, and really just to provide a medicine for the soul. And to do this, to get us going, what I want to do is just introduce myself. Many of you I don't know, but my name is Jeremy, and I'm the content director here at Northpoint. And I genuinely hope you had an amazing Thanksgiving. My wife and I did. We actually hosted Thanksgiving for the very first time, which was a whole ordeal. Cooking a turkey, like for the very first time, that was a big deal. And I was all nervous about how's it going to go and everything. But this is us on Thanksgiving Day. It's my wife Ashley and our 1-year-old son Grayson. And it was so much fun, and one of the things that seems to always be present when it comes to the Thanksgiving table is there's kind of this cacophony of stories and people and perspectives and differing opinions on things. I think about we have like the cousin Eddies who show up, right? And then we have this long-lost cousin who we haven't seen for a long time, and now they've got like blue hair. There's new girlfriends, boyfriends, new babies. Like it just brings all of these things together. And to highlight something that makes us so different, to highlight our different perspectives, I want to pose a question today that I want you to actually answer out loud if you're open to it. And the question is, when it comes to this glass right here, do you see this glass as half empty or half full? Where are you at? Half full. I heard some half empties. I'm glad there was one person that was willing to say half empty in the first service. And I instantly connected with them because for me personally, I'm more of a half empty kind of person. This is just who I am. I'm more like, what if, what about? For those of you who are familiar with the Enneagram, I'm a number 6 on the Enneagram, which means I'm just kind of the worrier sometimes. And that's kind of how my brain works and how I think. And when I get on planes, I like sweat like the entire plane ride pretty much. And when the engine's throttle down to descent, in my mind, I'm like bracing for us to just like nosedive every single time. When the pilot comes on and he says, hey, good news, smooth skies, like literally I'm going like, what is the bad news, man? Just shoot me straight. Tell me what's going to happen. I just would rather know. In fact, a couple of months ago, I went hiking with some buddies of mine out in Southwest Texas, one of the parks out there, and we got to the top of these peaks and these beautiful views, and I was perfectly content to like get to the top, stand away from the edge, and just like enjoy it and soak it in. And then my friends wanted to like put their toes on the edge, and they pull out their phone and stumble back a little bit, because you should pull out your phone once you get to the edge, not before. That makes perfect sense. But they would get to the edge and they're like taking pictures for the gram. I had one buddy, I kid you not, he starts to exercise on the edge of a cliff. He's like, I'm going to start doing push-ups. He's just like, and his head is just over like 1,000 feet. And he's like, I'm just going to do push-ups, because that makes perfect sense, right? And while this is happening, I'm literally just like pacing back and forth, like looking at my friends like, oh my gosh, what am I about to see? Sweating profusely. And I realize as I say all this, like I sound like a very exhausting person to be around. I just want to own that, and you can ask my wife if that's true or not. But I've just always viewed myself more a glass half empty kind of person. And because of this, I've put myself in this box that I'm a little bit more of a pessimist. And I have unknowingly misdefined this word in my life that we're going to talk about a lot today. And it's this word, joy. I've kind of thought that joy is reserved for like those happy, they're Enneagram 7, they're just like the party people. I thought that was who joy was for. But joy's not for someone like me. And these people are the ones that they're on the dance floor at the very first song at a wedding, and then by the last song, their tie is like wrapped around their head in like a ninja bandana or something, right? That's those kind of people. And if you're an introvert in the room, you know who I'm talking about, because it's those people, and chances are, if you're like me, you married one of those people. It's kind of how life goes. But I thought joy was for them, not for someone like me. but I've unknowingly misdefined it until really just a couple of years ago. Joy is so much bigger than just a personality or a wiring or an Enneagram number. Joy can be defined like this. It is a feeling of great pleasure or happiness. Joy is a feeling of great pleasure or happiness. That's what we want in our lives. That's what we desire for ourselves and the people around us as well. But the question is, are we experiencing it? Like as a culture, as a society, do we experience joy? There was a study done to answer this question. Actually, what's interesting is they measured people's laughter, because laughter is often an indicator of great pleasure or happiness or joy. And so they measured how often people laugh, and here's what they found. Kids, on average, laugh around 400 times per day. And that sounds like a lot, but then, I think of my son Grayson. When you make a funny face or you trip or you do anything, he just thinks it's the funniest thing in the world. He laughs all the time. But what about adults? What about us? How often do we laugh? See, adults on average laugh 25 times per day, which means kids are 16 times more joyful than adults. And if some of us are honest in here, perhaps we might admit or might say we know of someone that 25, even that number sounds like a bit of a stretch, right? Why is that? Why is there a disparity? Like, what happens to us that causes us to lose this laughter and this joy? Author, pastor, and leader Carey Nieuwhof, he has an explanation for this in his book, Didn't See It Coming. He says this. He says, as you grow older, your personality becomes more solidified. It hardens. Most people either end up happy and grateful or grumpy and crotchety. We all know two different types of old people. And I don't want to offend anybody in here, so I'm going to say like old people, okay? We all know two different types, okay? Either one, they're joyful and goofy and happy, or they're grumpy and crotchety and everything is wrong with the world. And I think the reason that happens is because as we go through life, we experience this thing called disappointment. And disappointment in a lot of ways is like the opposite of joy. It can be defined like this. It's a sadness, the opposite of happiness, or displeasure, the opposite of pleasure, caused by the non-fulfillment of one's hopes or expectations. Disappointment is what happens when we focus our life on our expectations. We expect things to turn out a certain way. We expect the election to go a certain way. We expect our life to look a certain way. We expect our kids to behave a certain way, our spouse to be a certain way, our bank accounts to look a certain way. We go into Target and we expect to live the Magnolia lifestyle, right? That's what we desire. We expect to get this job. We expect to keep the job. We have all these expectations on how our life is going to look. And then when those things don't happen and we go, God, how could you give me this set of cards? We experience disappointment. And I want to be careful here because some of us have experienced some very disappointing things in life. If you've been hurt or lied to or abused or betrayed or something like that, disappointment is not the right word to capture that. That is an understatement, and I don't want to minimize any of those things. But it's as my good friend Jamie Iveson says, and he was just up here leading us in a couple of songs, and if you ever talk to him off stage, you just know that he has all these like wise sayings that they just come out of him all the time. And he said this to me once, and I'll never forget it. He said, your level of disappointment in life is always proportional to your level of expectation. Meaning the greater expectation you have on how things are going to turn out, or even just how easy and comfortable you're going to be, the greater disappointment you are setting yourself up to experience. And what happens is the disappointment just perpetuates itself over and over, and it hardens and solidifies us. And we live a life devoid of joy. So the bottom line for today, I'm just going to give it to you right now. You can let out early or something, I don't know. But the bottom line is this, is just don't be a grumpy old person. Like, just stop it. Like, just don't. No, I want to hone in on joy today because I want you to get your joy back. If you are someone that you felt like you are running on empty, I want you to experience joy. If you're someone like me and you consider yourself more of a pessimist, I want you to experience joy. If you are the party, hold my beer kind of person, but maybe on the inside, there's something empty or lonely, I want you to experience joy. If you haven't laughed uncontrollably in a while, to the point that your abs hurt and there's tears in your eyes, like, I want you to laugh like that again. I desire that for you. Or if you're in here and maybe there's this internal lawyer or this cynic rising up in you as I talk, and you're going, whatever, joy, that's like a fluffy thing. I want you to get your joy back the most, because you might be the most at risk of becoming like that old grumpy guy. And I want you to experience joy. Not only do I want this for you, but God actually wants this for you as well. So often we think of God as kind of this all business. Jesus was all business all the time. He's this guy in the clouds with a lightning bolt. But did you know that God is happy? Did you know that God is joyful? That is his character. And the reason we know this is because God, by definition, must be perfect. He is and must be perfect, which means he has a perfect love, which means one could argue that God is the most joyful being in all of the universe. That is who he is. That is his character. And God wants you to experience joy, and yes, he allows us to experience negative things, disappointing things in our life, but we know through the person of Jesus, ultimately, he wants you to experience a life full of joy. What's amazing is Jesus actually says this to his disciples. When he gets done explaining what it looks like to participate with God one day, we were actually in the same set of verses last week as we were wrapping up our last series. At the end of this whole thing about what it means to live life with God, Jesus says this to his disciples. He says, I've told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. That God desires you and I to experience a complete, a full joy. To which begs the question, well, what does that look like? Well, what does complete joy mean? And James, the brother of Jesus, in his letter in the New Testament, the book of James, he actually has this couple sentences where he describes what a full or a complete joy looks like. And we're going to read it backwards because it kind of highlights the counterintuitive nature of what he's saying here. Here's what James says. He says, my brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds. Notice he says when, not if, but when this is going to happen. Like Jesus said, in this world you'll have trouble. When you experience these things, here's what you are to do. And then in the beginning he had said, consider it pure joy, complete joy when you face trials of many kinds. Every time I read this sentence from James, I cannot help but think about what the great philosopher Ronald Weasley says in this movie. Look at this.
You're going to suffer, but you're going to be happy about it.
I just think that if you know, you know, and if you don't, I'm sorry, it's fine. He's not a philosopher. I'm just going to put that out there before anybody takes that too far. But that so captures like how we think about this sentence that James says right here. We're like, well, James, this doesn't make any sense. Like we're going to see it as joy when we go through difficult things. And he says, yes, because there's this one really key word in this sentence, and it's this word, consider. In the original language this is written in, it literally means like regard it as. It means choose to see it a specific way. Consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. Why? Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may become mature and complete, experience a complete joy, not lacking anything. So when we go through these things, it's like there's this refinement, this persevering work that is happening in us. And as I was thinking about this, you know, I recently, my wife and I, we've been on the other side of a mentor of ours for years, since before we were married. And he's been with us through just high highs and low lows of life. And he came to mind as I was prepping this week because we went and saw him recently. And we walk in and we explain the situation that we have in our life. And it's just really complex. And it feels like for the first time, like we don't know what to do. Like, you know, a lot of times, like, we know what the right thing is. It feels like for the first time in a long time, maybe, or ever, like, what's wise is just so foggy and unclear to us, and we don't know what to do. It just feels so complex. And so we explain this whole thing to him, and then he pauses, and he looks at us, and he says, okay, well, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know what you should do either, but I'm happy for you guys, because you're going to learn a lot as you figure it out. To which we later just thought, like, that's not helpful at all. It's not at all what we were looking for. But that's kind of James's point here, is he is saying, consider it pure joy. Look at what's happening and recognize there's this refining thing happening in you, that because of that and because we know that it's coming, that you and I have an opportunity, even in the face of unmet expectations or disappointment, we have the opportunity to choose joy. So often we view joy as something that's going to happen to us, like it's just going to come our way, but James is saying, no. You have to consider it as, you have to choose joy in your life. And I want to pause here for just a second, because I want to recognize that for some of us in the room, and this might be a small group of people in here, I don't know, I'm not sure, but for some of us in the room, if you find yourself in the middle of like a recent life tragedy, or you find yourself in the middle of something that's just been, you never expected this to be a part of your story, I just almost want to give you freedom to, for now, just put today's talk or message on the shelf. Because scriptures are clear that there is a time to weep, there is a time to mourn, and in no way do we want to minimize that, but you can put it on the shelf for now. Again, that's a for now, because eventually there is a time to rejoice, the scriptures talk about. And so often, and James's point is that so often we just wait for joy to come our way, and he's saying, no. It is a decision to see it a specific way. There's an amazing example of this man named Viktor Frankl, and he was in a concentration camp in World War II, and when he was put into the camp, his entire family was killed. But he survived, and later on in life, he looks back and he talks about kind of the disposition, what gave him the strength to survive this camp, even after losing everything. And he says this amazing statement. He says, everything can be taken away from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Here's what this means for you and I. When it comes to the joy that we experience in our life, your level of joy is a choice. The amount of joy that you have in your life is up to you. It's not proportional to the amount of good things or good circumstances. No, joy is something that we consider as, we choose to regard it as, not external but internal. We choose joy. To which I think a lot of us in here would go, well, how in the world do we do that? How can we choose joy in the face of all the things we experience? And what's really cool is when you take a step back and you look at just all of the New Testament and all the different letters in the New Testament, there's this one letter called Philippians. The Apostle Paul writes it to the Philippian church, and when you look at all the different pieces of this letter, you would kind of make the assumption that the Philippians are kind of like a joyless group of people. Because Paul puts in this letter just over and over and over again, joy, 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 rejoice. Here's what joy looks like. Don't forget, have joy all throughout this letter. And he gives us a window into how we choose joy in our lives. Here's what Paul says. He says, whatever happens, my dear brothers and sisters, rejoice in the Lord. That word literally means like verb joy, like choose to see it a specific way, celebrate in the Lord. I never get tired of telling you these things, and when the Apostle Paul, who wrote more than half the New Testament, says that, we should probably pay attention. I never get tired of telling you these things, and I do it to safeguard your faith, to keep your faith in check, to guard your faith. You see, so often, I think we look at faith as this kind of uber spiritual thing over here. It's serious, it's all business. And then joy kind of feels like fluffy, and it's kind of self-help. And my wife, when she goes to Starbucks, she gets these drinks that have these really long names, and I can never remember what they are, so I just call them her Frappa Yo-Yo drinks. So you want me to get one of those Frappa Yo-Yo drinks for you? And joy is kind of like that. Like it's like just Frappa Yo-Yo. It's just this fluffy thing over here. And Paul's saying, no. It is connected. That faith and joy are inextricably linked. Which means for you and I, that if we are to grow in our faith, eventually that means growing in the amount of joy we experience. That if we are to experience a maturity in faith, eventually it means we're going to experience an overflowing of joy in our life. And this makes sense because the closer you get to God, if he is the most joyful being in all the universe, then the more that joy is just going to get all over your life. They are connected. And so how do we choose it? Paul begins to tell us. He says, tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. We're going to look at the second half, but the first part is really important. It's kind of foundational. Tell God what you need, meaning it's a recognition that I don't already have everything I need. And when we thank God for all he's done, it's, hey, I'm getting something that I didn't have before. I'm receiving. It's a surrender of control. It's a posture of humility to begin it. And then he says from there, thank God for all he has done. That if we are to choose joy, we are first and foremost to give thanks. Now, I just want to recognize that you know this already. Like, you know this to be true. Like, we should have an attitude of gratitude, right? Like, to the point that talking about it, especially around Thanksgiving, can feel like a cliche. Like, oh, it is, there it is, give thanks. Okay, let's all walk out and feel better, right? You know this already, but I think that it's often the most simplest solutions are sometimes the most effective. And not only this, but I don't think we can overstate both the simplicity, yes, of gratitude, but also the significance of gratitude in our life. See, we should take pause whenever we see a certain life principle kind of rise up in so many different schools of thought. All sorts of different religions, philosophies, and psychology, all of them who disagree on fundamentals of life would talk about the importance of gratitude in life. There's one particular one, a man named Sean Aker, and he writes this book called The Happiness Advantage. He's a TED Talk speaker, studies happiness, writes for the Harvard Business Review, not really religious at all, but he says this about gratitude. He says that happiness is not about lying to ourselves or turning a blind eye to the negative, but about adjusting our brain so that we can see the ways to rise above our circumstances. It's on that kind of side of thinking, philosophy, psychology, and then you go to the more faith-based or spiritual side of thinking. And one of my favorite authors is Brennan Manning, and it's hard for me to narrow down what my favorite quote of his would be, but this is one of my all-time favorites, and here's what he says about gratitude in his book, Ruthless Trust. He says, the antithesis of giving thanks is grumbling. Again, grumblers, grumpy old people, they don't give thanks. They don't experience joy. He says those are opposites, but one who doesn't grumble is one who gives thanks. He says, the grumblers live in a state of self-induced stress. And then look at this. Here we go. They bellyache about the unfairness of life, the paucity of their gifts, the insensitivity of their spouse and employer, the liberals who are destroying the church, and the conservatives who have deserted their post, the hot weather and the cold pizza, the greedy rich and the shiftless poor, and their victimization at the hands of the IRS, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and, of course, the manufacturers of Viagra. This is why I like Brandon Manning. He says stuff like that. But that so captures the grumblers, right? Everything is wrong in the world, and this is the opposite of giving thanks. But Brendan Manning says, on a serious note, just a couple of paragraphs later, he says, the foremost quality, the most important distinction of a trusting disciple, one who is pursuing Jesus in their life, is gratefulness. The foremost quality is gratefulness. Whether you are a follower of Jesus or not, you cannot get away from the importance of gratitude in your life. For me personally, I started kind of practicing gratitude maybe 8 or 9 years ago and really started to take it serious maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And honestly, the reason is because behind the scenes, we have this internal joke about who are kind of like our holiday preachers. Like when Buck goes out of town, like the holiday preachers, come up. And what's funny is Buck goes out of town because he has kids and all that. And now I'm having kids, and his kids are going off to college, so I'm wondering if maybe the scales will balance one day, and Buck will be a holiday preacher. But my point with that has nothing to do with anything. But because I found myself standing up here around this time of year, and in a way talking about gratitude, I thought it'd be pretty awkward if I didn't practice that in my own life. And so about 5 or 6 years ago, I began to get really serious about it. And this is my journal, my current one. And I've got a shelf of these, and it's just from Walmart. There's nothing special about it. But I began practicing this, and at first I was like, oh, this is nice. Like, this feels good. Gratitude, right? And then it really became like a lifeline for me in the past 5 or 6 years. Because in my wife and I's life, what we've experienced is we've had these kind of high highs, these joyful moments, starting a family, our marriage and everything happening here in Northpoint, these amazing things. And then sometimes, literally on the same day or in the same week, we have these like low things that hit us. Things that we never thought were going to be a part of our story, unexpected dynamics. We don't know what to do with them. And so often for me, I found myself leaning in the direction of the lows. Again, I'm more glass half empty. And because when I did this, it kind of allowed the negative things to rob the really joyful things in my life. And the reason I say gratitude is a lifeline is because what it does for me is it brings me back center. It allows me to go, yes, God, here is what I need. Here are the things we're facing. We don't know what to do. We're trying to figure this out. But God, at the same time, thank you for what you are continually doing in my life. Thank you for these amazing things, my family, that I get to experience each and every day. And it brings me center, and in a lot of ways for me, it increases my capacity for joy. And what's so interesting when you think about one's capacity for joy is there have actually been studies to look at how you and your brain increase your ability to experience joy in your life. And you guys, I'm just give you a heads up, we're going to nerd out on gratitude here for a second, okay? But there's this book called The Other Half of Church. And The Other Half of Church is written by a neurobiologist and a pastor. And what they did is they broke down and studied and looked at what's happening in our brains when we grow in our faith or when we grow spiritually. And there's an entire chapter that they learned as they went that they had to dedicate to joy and gratitude. And they look at the brain from two different sides of what's happening inside of our minds. From the left side, from the left side of our brain, there's logic and speech and problem solving and conscious thought. Like the left side of our brain is where the processing power for all of that happens. And then on the right side of our brain, we have identity and relational attachments and emotional attachments, experiences, assessment of surroundings. This is how our brain is divided up, where the processing happens in our minds. And what they argue is that most of us process or we practice gratitude from the left side of our brain. And so we just think, oh, I'm thankful for this, or I'm thankful for these things. And we use words or logic or thinking or conscious thought to get there. But they go on to say there's a lot more horsepower in our brain for joy and gratitude. And the way that we access that is actually by practicing gratitude from the right side of our brain. And so what does that look like? Well, it's not just saying the words, but it's putting yourself in the memories and the experiences of what you're grateful for. It's the emotion. It's the connection that's happening relationally. It's all of those different things, the spirituality, the experience of what is happening, and from that place being thankful. So it's not just me going, I'm grateful for my wife, Ashley. It's me going, no. I remember a couple of weeks ago, we were on that walk, and we were on that hill in our neighborhood where the sun was setting, and we had this amazing conversation, just rich conversation about family and God. And I remember looking at her in that moment and just going, God, thank you for this amazing bride that I get to do life with. That's right brain gratitude. It's not just, God, thanks for my family. It's God, thank you for that moment. I was standing in the kitchen doing the dishes recently, and I'm washing the dishes, and I look over in the living room, and Ashley and Grayson are starting to have a dance party, and Grayson is 1 year old, and Ashley turns up the music far too loud. Again, I'm glass half empty, so it's way too loud, but whatever. They're having a blast, and they turn it up, and then Grayson just goes nuts. And when a 1 year old goes nuts dancing, it's like gripping something and then bouncing uncontrollably. It's amazing. And then he's got this new move where he's like trying to like turn his head side to side with the rhythm, but he doesn't know how to like turn his eyes sequentially like make it happen. So he turns his eyes first, and then he like violently turns, and then turns back and violently turns. It's amazing. Like he gets his dance moves from his dad for sure. But I remember washing the dishes, watching all this happening, and I had to stop. I honestly just got emotional because I was watching my family, just all their joy, all their peace, all their contentment. And in that moment, I just thought, God, thank you for this family you've given me. It's right brain gratitude. It's not just I'm thankful for my house or my apartment or whatever. God, thank you for the home and what it feels like to come home to this home every single day. Not just, God, thank you for your son Jesus, died on the cross for me. Yeah. God, thank you that while I was far from you, you sent your son to die a death so that I could have a relationship with you. And God, thank you that because of that, when I'm driving home on a horrible day, that you meet me in those moments. Your mercies, your grace are new every day, and you are with me right there. God, thank you. See, that is a right brain gratitude. that increases your capacity for joy. It allows you to experience a fullness of joy in your life. Paul wraps up what it looks like to choose joy. Back in Philippians, he says this to kind of end it. He says, "And now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts. Consciously decide to think about what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise." Paul says, decide to think about, in other words, if you were to choose joy, to focus on all that is good. And this is not a put your head in the sand and ignore what's going on in the world kind of thing. No, it's more recognizing that we already have a propensity as humans towards the negative. I mean, very simply, look at entertainment, look at TV shows and movies. Like, none of us want to watch a show of this couple who meets and they're so respectful and kind and they communicate so well and wow, we can learn things from. No, like we want the juicy stuff. Like we gravitate towards that. We don't want to watch something about a healthy relationship. And there's this kind of gravitational pull towards negative and negativity. But what happens is when we allow that to wreak havoc in our minds, we wake up each day and we set Fox News or CNN or pick your news station as the background noise in our minds and in our homes. And no wonder we don't experience a lot of joy, right? Or we wake up in the morning and the first thing we do is grab our phone and we look at Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or Amazon or our work email, and we allow that to be the very thing that we focus on first thing in the day. And no wonder we don't experience a lot of joy in our life. And these things aren't bad in and of themselves. Like, we should know what is going on in the world. We should be cognizant of that. But when we allow it to determine our focus, what we're doing is we're giving our emotional equilibrium to something else around us, and we're not deciding it on our own. And Paul was so ahead of his time here. I mean, there's no social media. There's none of this technology at this time. And Paul is so ahead of his time when he writes, "Fix your thoughts." He continues. He says, "Keep putting into practice all you learned and received from me." It is a practice, intentional, over and over and over again. Everything you heard from me and saw me doing, and then look at what he says to finish it. "Then the God of peace will be with you." If you choose joy in this way, when you give thanks and you focus on all that is good, you will experience a joy and a peace from your Heavenly Father. And so to wrap up, let me ask you, for you personally, not the person sitting next to you, not someone else you're thinking about, if you're watching online, I want to ask you, how is your joy? How is the level of joy in your life? Can you remember the last time you laughed until you cried? Like tears of joy, like pure laughter. Can you remember? What would the people who are closest to you, your family, your friends, your kids, what would they say about your level of joy? Is there anything or anyone robbing your joy? Are you giving your focus away each day instead of deciding what you're going to fix your thoughts on? And because of that, a piece of your joy is being robbed. Or perhaps is there someone robbing your joy? For me personally, I find that's most often the person looking back at me in the mirror each day. Maybe that's the person robbing joy for you as well. What does it look like for you to choose joy? What does it look like for you to not just wait for joy to happen to you, but to intentionally choose it? Maybe it is giving thanks. Maybe you've always known you should, but you've never done it. You've never started a practice of gratitude in your life. Maybe it's going to Walmart right after you get out of here and buying a journal. Maybe it's the Notes app on your phone, whatever it is, to begin writing down 5, 7, 10, whatever. It's about progress, not perfection. Begin writing down things that you're thankful for. And when you do this each day, you might have this moment where you realize, I just write down the same thing every day. And that's kind of the point sometimes, because those are the things we are often most inclined to miss, the things that we need to be grateful for each and every day. Perhaps you need to start practicing right brain gratitude. Be thinking about the experience and emotion of the things you are thankful for. Maybe for you, it's choosing to focus on something different or deciding to kind of take control of what you focus on and not give that to something else. I don't mean to harp on the screen again, but it's kind of the thing that takes our focus most of the time. Maybe you need to delete some apps on your phone. Maybe you need to unsubscribe. Or perhaps you just need to decide, and I would say, I don't think this is an exaggeration, you can tell me if it is, but the most spiritual thing that some of us in here could do today is to go home and unplug our phone charger from our nightstand and go charge our phone somewhere else in the house. So when we wake up each morning, we are setting ourselves up for success to decide what we're going to focus on, ultimately experience joy in our life. What does it look like for you to choose joy? And just for a minute, imagine with me what this would do to the version of you that you bring into all the different aspects of your life, to the version of you that you bring to your marriage, to your community, to your relationships, to your job. Imagine bringing a more joyful version of you and what that would do to those different areas. Imagine what this would do in your faith. I genuinely believe that if you begin to choose joy and practice these things, you're going to eventually find yourself sitting on the other side of the person of Jesus. And the reason I believe that is because in terms of all the things we can be thankful for, he is the best thing to be thankful for because his sacrifice on the cross of Christ allows the ability for us to have a relationship with our heavenly Father. There's nothing better to be thankful for than that. And then in terms of focusing on all that is good, you think about true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable and excellent and worthy of praise. All of these things, Jesus embodies all of those. And so I believe as you begin to choose joy, eventually you're going to find yourself sitting on the other side of the source of joy in our life. I'll wrap up with this thought. So often we find ourselves, or maybe we've heard or we've thought this before, this question, well, doesn't God want me to be happy? And this makes sense. I mean, we want to be happy. So it comes from a place of just wanting to experience joy and happiness in our own life. But I think so often we use this question to justify something we want to do, or we don't really want to hear truth. We don't want to hear not to do this. But also this question really comes on this assumption that we know what makes us happy better than God knows what makes us happy. And that's a dangerous assumption. I believe that when you begin to choose joy and you find yourself sitting on the other side of the source of joy in your life, you're going to discover that God wants you to ultimately find your joy in him, the greatest joy we can experience. And so what does it look like for you today to choose joy? Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, thank you that through the person of Jesus, that we can have an opportunity for this relationship with you, and that we can understand that there's a complete joy available to all of us. God, I genuinely just pray and ask that you would open us up. For some of us, it means a softening of our hearts or whatever that looks like, to just experience joy in our life, a joy that comes from you. God, that's what we desire. That's what we want. And so in everything we're going for, in our running on empty moments and our disappointment and expectations and all this, would you just meet us there and help us experience the joy that you want for us? In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here. We'll see you next week as we start our Christmas series. See ya.